And one thing that I was thinking when I was watching the series is if you were to do a similar series today, your backers, producers would be Netflix, HBO, Showtime. What kind of series would you have addressing contemporary issues with, in quotes, a crime slant? And you would get the Jinx, I'll see you in the dark, all these, or the one about the Macmillions. You would have all these sensationalizing of a topic that is supposed to be of interest to vast audiences.
Right.
The seriousness of the Decalogue, I cannot imagine being done today.
No, and I can't imagine it either. I think that this is something that you have to earn, and that you have to earn through suffering. I think that my experience of Polish art, especially of the last century, is so much like my experience of the Decalogue. I remember going to Jasna Gora, where Our Lady of Czestochowa is, and there's an incredible Stations of the Cross there. I forget the name of the painter. But these stations are brutal, but in a way that's very I don't know. It's very particular, and it's similar to the way that Decalogue 5 and a short film about killing are brutal. There's a spiritual seriousness. There's a awareness of the gravity of suffering, of death, of the act of killing, and I think that that's something that's just so far away from us culturally right now in the United
Exactly
States.
right.
Perhaps maybe not always, but certainly right now. And so
the weight of history is different. You cannot produce a Gorecki here with a symphony of sorrowful, I forget the exact title.
Songs,
right?
Yeah.
Which is basically Auschwitz, the destruction of life. And if you take the films of Paweł Palikowski, the wonderful filmmaker of Aida and Cold War, he's a descendant of Kieslowski, a spiritual descendant of Kieslowski, because they are dealing with Polish history, and you take someone like Chinatown, the director.
Oh no. Yeah.
Polanski.
Yeah.
Polanski has never overcome the horror of a life shaped until his mid-20s in Poland.
Right.
Never. How can you?
There's another element to this too, which is a little discomforting. Kieslowski said he found it easier to make films under the communist Polish system than afterwards. You didn't have to worry about whether something was going to be profitable or not. And it may not be, we may not like to say this because obviously, the assumption is that film art, controlled by the communist state is always going to be compromised in some way. But, these filmmakers in Poland specifically, especially in Poland specifically, found ways to get around the censors, with a certain amount of ease, ultimately. And, of course, it was also made at a particular period in, communist Poland, when this was possible towards the end of communist Poland. But yeah, he just didn't have to worry about whether something was going to be profitable or not. And, as much as, to equivocate between communist tyranny and, the tyranny of the market is kind of misleading in a certain way. There is a certain amount of truth to the fact that, in a system that's determined entirely by, consumer demand or whatever, there is a sort of that is deciding what films are made or what films are not made. But we're always free to choose based on other criteria. Production companies are free to do that to a certain extent. But I mean, it is true. They were able to simply make films that they thought were important to make to some extent, regardless of commercial interest. Of course, it was a commercial success, as you said, but Yeah.
Two observations. One is that in order, again, to see the mindset, understand the mindset at the time, there's the great book of Czesław Miłosz, The Captive Mind. Phenomenal book that describes the 3 or 4, 5 mindsets of Polish intellectuals that say yes to the communist regime. An eye-opener. And two, a phrase I always cite from André Malraux, the writer and Minister of Culture of Charles de Gaulle. The phrase is, film is a business that sometimes disguises itself as art, right? And you have the understanding of Lenin of what film is for, which is a propaganda tool. And then you have the two clashing systems. What I was like always to let the students know is that whether you are in Europe or whether you are in the US, it's not the same, doesn't work the same way, but there are public funds. That there's the National Endowment for the Humanities, for the Arts, there are state funds, this and that there's a possibility of having documentaries. The ones, the documentaries that you see on PBS here are not the ones that you see on HBO. HBO, for the reasons that we have been talking of the market, goes into the exploitation, this and that, and then you have all these series, crime, and then occasionally interesting work as well. But the PBS production is very different. And it's basically monies assigned, allotted, given to filmmakers, right? You have this great series, POV, Frontline, American Masters, American Experience, that handle the life, culture, politics of the US and the world in ways that you do not see done privately, right? So I am not so despondent, and understanding, the history of how all these things get made, you see that yes, there is something to be said for those smart, intelligent, tenacious filmmakers and their difficulties of constraint that produce work. And a case study of interest is Yang Yimou in the People's Republic of China, whose first film, first decade, was phenomenal indictments, even the Red Guards, everything we can think of. But beginning with a film of 2006, I believe, Hero, he adheres to the Communist Party line. So there's so much that you can produce in a limited space, right? Here we have the space is much bigger for great work, right? In totalitarian regimes, you have the boot on you all the time, and not everybody is clever to speak metaphorically, allegorically, right? So that's why I don't see those so opposing. It's the conditions of production, right? And
well, I think one of the great things one of the great things about talking to you about this is to get a greater sense of the differences between these different film cultures and these starting off with, at the beginning of our conversation, with the different cultural differences between you and your husband, for example. It's very valuable to zoom out and see this in the context of Polish film, something that neither James or I know a great deal about. So it's really helpful to see the big picture of the series in its cultural and political context, and we're appreciative of that.
What helps me in my particular case is that I have been attending the Berlin Film Festival since 1985. So I got to see all of the films that came out from then, the Eastern Europe, and I got to see all those allegories, the fights and this and that. And I also got to see, after 89, 1991, the things that have been coming out, and we still have great filmmakers engaged in a conversation about the recent past, or the 20th century past, beginning with Sokurov, who is still making films, and some other recent filmmakers that are phenomenal. So we get to talk about one set of films, but they are not alone, right? We may not have the chance to see the rest of the production, But if you have the chance of the film festivals, that's where you get a wider sense of what is being produced, right? So the complexity and the variety of international cinema, I guess my point is.